A millionaire broke down in tears the night a waitress showed his daughter what even his money could never buy: understanding. The billionaire CEO stepped into a crumbling church hall, his tailored suit out of place among peeling paint and worn wooden benches. What happened next would test not his wealth, but his soul. "Mr. Harland, will you sit with the children?" asked a quiet teacher. David Harland scoffed. He hadn't come here for sentiment. But when his young daughter raised her hands to speak in silence, the room held its breath. For years he had ignored her world. That night, he faced a choice: protect his pride, or finally hear his child for the very first time. Just a quick little pause before I forget. If you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, please leave a like and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. Now let's jump back in. A little girl raised her hands in silence, and the crowded dining hall froze around her. The hall was full that evening. Crystal glasses caught the light. Silver forks clicked against porcelain plates. Men in dark suits leaned close to whisper business. Women in silk gowns kept their eyes lifted, watching and being watched. The air hummed with wealth, but it was a cold hum, measured, practiced. At the far end of the room, a man sat with his daughter. He was known: David Harrington, 54, real estate and oil. Tall, broad-shouldered, perfectly pressed gray suit. His presence was heavy, his authority worn like armor. Beside him, his daughter sat small and pale. 10 years old, blonde hair brushed smooth, white dress tied with a pale blue sash. Her name was Lily. She sat quietly while the music played low in the background. She did not speak. She never spoke. It was then, without warning, that Lily raised her hands. Not to wave, not to reach for her father. She shaped them, carefully, deliberately. Fingers bent, palms shifted, words without sound. She was signing. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The orchestra's notes seemed to stumble in the air. Heads turned, forks lowered. A ripple passed through the hall. "Does she?" A woman whispered from one of the nearer tables. "She's deaf," another voice murmured, almost disbelieving, as though such a thing did not belong in a room built for perfection. David shifted in his seat. His jaw tightened. He reached for his glass, though it was still full. He did not look at her hands. He looked away instead, out toward the long windows that showed the city's night lights. And then, a voice came from the side. A quiet one, but it carried. It was Emma Lawson, 26, the waitress who had been serving their table. She wore a simple black dress, white apron tied neatly at the waist. Her hair, dark brown and pulled into a modest bun, was out of her face. She was unnoticed most of the evening, moving with quiet care among the glittering guests. But she noticed the child. She saw what others missed. Emma's hands moved, just slightly. Not in flourish, not in display. With humility, she signed back. The girl froze, her eyes widening. Her lips parted in a breath that never formed a word. Then, slowly, she smiled. Around them, the whispers grew sharper. "Why is she? She can't." "Waitress? Is she?" David's glass touched the table harder than he meant it to. The sound was sharp in the silence. His voice followed, deep and clipped. "That's enough." The moment had cracked open, and now all eyes waited. The manager was already walking toward their table, face set, ready to shut it down. The manager cut through the room like a blade. His black suit was narrow, pressed within an inch of its life. A crimson tie, too bright, marked him out among the muted tones of the guests. His shoes clicked against the marble floor as he approached. The whispers hushed. Eyes tracked him, then drifted back to Emma, who stood at Lily's side with her hands still resting quietly before her. She had not stepped back. She had not apologized. The manager's voice was sharp enough to carry without raising it. "Miss Lawson," he said, his lips pulled thin. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Emma lowered her gaze slightly, not out of shame, but control. "She signed to me," she answered softly. "I only answered." A pause. Tables leaned closer to listen. Somewhere, a spoon fell against a plate with a small, clattering note. "This is not," the manager replied, "a place for theatrics." His glance cut toward the guests, as though to ask for agreement. A few nodded, almost embarrassed to be caught watching. Emma's chin lifted just enough to meet his eyes. Her voice did not change. It wasn't theatrics. It was language. The silence that followed was heavier than the words themselves. Even Lily seemed to feel it. The girl's hands curled back into her lap, her small shoulders stiffening as though she were at fault. David shifted again, his presence filling the table like a storm cloud. He cleared his throat, though he did not intervene. Not yet. His silence pressed as much weight as the manager's scolding tone. The manager straightened, his hands folded behind his back. "You're here to serve. Nothing more." Emma could have nodded. She could have whispered an apology and walked away. The thought brushed her mind. But then she saw Lily's wide eyes, still searching her face with fragile hope. Emma had seen those eyes before, in her younger brother, years ago, when he tried to ask for help no one knew how to give. Her hands moved again, slow, deliberate. She signed one simple phrase, not to the manager, not to the guests, but to Lily alone. "It's all right." Gasps broke out like a chorus. One man shook his head, muttering about impropriety. A woman at the far side leaned closer to whisper something sharp into her husband's ear. The manager's face flushed red, whether with anger or embarrassment, no one could tell. "You're finished here," he snapped. Emma folded her hands in front of her apron. Her posture was still, almost serene, though her heart pressed hard against her ribs. "If that's what must be," she said. But she did not step back, and the refusal was louder than any protest could have been. David Harrington had not spoken since his clipped, "That's enough." Yet the air around him was taut, as though every guest felt the weight of what he might do next. His fork lay untouched. His glass, sweating against the linen, stood full. His broad shoulders leaned back, but his jaw worked in small, tense movements. For a man who had built towers out of steel and glass, silence was his weapon. He used it now, and the room obeyed. Lily sat very still beside him. Her hands were folded tight, as if she wanted to make them disappear. She had asked for so little, just one reply, one bridge. But she felt her father's shadow fall over her, heavy as iron. A guest at the next table broke the hush. "Such a shame," the man muttered, not quietly enough. "Bringing her out like this." David's eyes snapped sideways. The man looked instantly at his plate. No one spoke again. David turned back toward his daughter. He reached for her wrist, not harshly, but with a firmness that meant to control. He tapped her folded hands against her lap. The gesture was meant as comfort, but the message was clear: stay still. For a flicker of a moment, something crossed his face. Weariness, perhaps. Regret. A shadow of another life. In his mind, the hall's noise faded and another image rose. A hospital room, sterile and white. A woman with soft golden hair, Lily's mother, her laughter muffled now by the oxygen mask. The last words she tried to speak were never heard. Not by him. Not by their daughter. Silence had followed him ever since. He blinked, and the memory dissolved. The present crashed back. Guests staring, Emma standing, the manager fuming. David needed to regain control. His voice, when it came, was calm but edged like steel. "This has gone far enough," he said, eyes fixed on Emma at last. "You're upsetting my child." Emma's lips pressed together. She lowered her gaze to Lily, never to him. And for the briefest second, she let her fingers shape one word in the air: strong. Lily's breath caught. A small sound, half sigh, half laugh, escaped her lips. The sound pierced David's chest. He had not heard her make it in years. His hand tightened on the tablecloth. Authority demanded he end this. But a father's heart whispered otherwise. And so he straightened, gathering his armor of dignity. "We will leave now," he said, already rising from his chair. The crowd parted as he stood. Emma did not move aside. Her presence was quiet, but immovable. David's chair scraped against the marble. The sound was sharp, final. His tall frame rose above the table, casting Lily further into shadow. She looked at the floor, her small hands trembling slightly in her lap. The guests shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward, curious for a spectacle. Others drew back, uneasy but unwilling to speak. The orchestra faltered once again, bows dragging uncertainly across strings. Emma stood where she was. She should have lowered her eyes, stepped away, let the storm pass. That was what the rules demanded. That was what the manager expected. But her gaze returned to Lily, and she remembered. Her younger brother, Daniel, 8 years old when fever took his hearing. She had been 15. Their mother worked nights at the laundry, exhausted, while Emma stayed up teaching him the signs she learned from books borrowed at the library. She remembered the night Daniel signed his first word back to her: home. His smile had been small, proud, and certain. That memory steadied her now. Emma bent slightly, enough so her voice could reach Lily without forcing her to lift her head. "Would you like me to show you something?" she asked. Her tone was plain, respectful. Lily's blue eyes flickered up, uncertain. Her hands hovered, almost afraid to answer. Emma did not rush. She lifted her own hands, slow and deliberate. She shaped the sign for courage. Her fingers moved like the opening of a flower. Gasps broke again among the guests. Someone muttered, "She's doing it again." The manager hissed, "Miss Lawson." But Emma did not stop. Lily hesitated. Then her small hands rose, uncertain but eager. She mirrored the motion. Not perfect, not graceful, but full of effort. The child smiled again, wider this time. A hush fell over the tables. Even those who had scorned the scene now leaned in. The simple beauty of it could not be ignored. David's hand tightened on the back of his chair. His face, usually unreadable, carried a storm now. Anger at defiance, fear of exposure, but beneath it, something rawer. He had not seen his daughter's eyes shine like this in years. Emma signed once more. "You are brave." The girl mouthed the words silently, her lips forming shapes her father had never taught her. The room seemed to still, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to break the spell. David drew in a breath, preparing to speak. And then the manager's hand came down sharply on Emma's arm. The manager's hand struck Emma's arm like a gavel. "Enough," he snapped, his voice echoing louder than the orchestra behind him. His grip was not cruel, but it was firm, meant to end all debate. The crowd leaned back, startled at the contact. The thin veil of civility wavered. David's voice did not rise, but its weight was heavier. "Let her go." The manager froze, confused. "Sir, I said." David repeated, slower, darker, "Let her go." The hand released. Emma stood steady, though her arm tingled. She looked down at Lily, whose fingers had fallen back into her lap. The spark was flickering out, fear threatening to snuff it. Emma's heart squeezed at the sight. Her mind slipped backward, unbidden. A church basement, 6 years ago. Long tables with plastic cloths. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Her brother, Daniel, tugging her sleeve with urgent eyes. He wanted to join the other children playing, but the sound of their laughter was barred to him. They never turned to see him, never slowed their words enough. Emma had crouched low, taken his hands, and signed, "Show them. Show them who you are." He had walked out into the circle of children and signed his name. They stared, confused. One boy snickered. But Daniel, small and unshaken, spelled it again. Slowly, clearly, until one child tried to copy. Then another. A laugh turned into a smile, then applause. Emma had stood at the edge, invisible but proud. That day, she learned what courage could grow when someone believed in you. Her eyes returned to Lily now, trembling under her father's looming figure. Emma bent lower, whispering in a tone no one else could hear. "You remind me of him," she said softly. "Don't let them close your hands." Lily's breath caught, her lips shaping a silent howl. Emma lifted her fingers again, ready to answer. But David's voice cut through, laced with memory of his own. He saw not Emma, not the crowd, but his wife, Sarah, standing in their kitchen in a soft yellow dress, hair loose around her shoulders, smiling as she signed across the counter. Family. She had insisted on learning, though David had never mastered more than a handful of signs. For her sake, Sarah had said, when Lily was only 3. The memory burned now. He had buried it deep, but Emma's defiance had unearthed it. His chest tightened. He sat slowly, heavy, as though lowered by grief more than choice. The guests looked on, unsure what they were witnessing. Then a voice from the back of the hall called out, sharp and breaking the spell. "Manager, what's happening here?" The voice from the back broke the fragile hush. It belonged to another guest, red-faced and impatient, calling for order as though the scene were an inconvenience. His interruption snapped the attention of the room back to the present. The manager straightened, adjusting his jacket, seizing the moment to regain command. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, raising his hands, "we apologize for the disturbance. Please, return to your meals." But no one moved. The silverware remained untouched. All eyes stayed fixed on the table at the far end, where a waitress stood quietly before a millionaire and his daughter. Emma did not flinch under the weight of those stares. She folded her hands neatly before her apron, her posture calm, her breathing measured. She had stood through worse. David's gaze lingered on her. The memory of Sarah's yellow dress, her delicate hands forming family, still hovered at the edges of his vision. He had wanted to bury it, but Emma had pulled it out into the light. He leaned forward slightly, his deep voice breaking the silence. "What is your name?" Emma blinked once, surprised by the sudden directness. She had expected dismissal, perhaps another order to leave. "Not this. Emma Lawson, sir," she answered simply. The crowd stirred. A few whispered her name under their breath, tasting it as though it were a clue to a mystery. The manager paled, unsure how to proceed. David studied her for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp. Then he said, "See me tomorrow." Gasps rippled through the room. A woman at one of the nearer tables muttered, "Tomorrow?" "He never." Her husband hushed her. Emma's composure held, though her heartbeat quickened. She lowered her eyes, hiding the flicker of uncertainty that passed through her. Her hands gripped the edge of her apron, almost trembling. Still, her voice stayed steady. "Yes, sir." Lily watched the exchange, her eyes darting from her father to Emma, confusion and hope tangled together on her small face. The orchestra tried to resume, notes uncertain, but it was too late. The night had changed. The guests whispered among themselves, glancing sideways at Emma as she collected herself and stepped back from the table. The manager followed her with sharp eyes, his lips pressed tight. He did not understand what had just shifted, only that his control had slipped through his hands. Emma walked quietly toward the service doors. Each step was deliberate, composed. Yet beneath her calm, her thoughts churned. She had been noticed, and not in the way she had ever wished. The doors closed softly behind her. At the table, David lifted his glass at last and drank. Lily sat upright, her fingers twitching as though already practicing words she had just learned. The room had no appetite for food any longer. Something else lingered instead, an unsettled wonder. The next morning, Emma's shoes clicked softly against polished marble. She had never walked halls like these before. Light poured through tall glass windows, illuminating pale stone walls and vast canvases of modern art that stretched nearly to the ceiling. Every step echoed, sharp, reminding her she did not belong. She wore her cleanest dress, a simple navy blue, long sleeves, hem brushing her knees. Modest but neat. Her dark hair was pulled back again, a few loose strands falling near her face. She carried no handbag, no jewelry, only a small notebook tucked discreetly in her pocket. At the reception desk, a young woman in a tailored gray skirt and crisp blouse looked her over from head to toe. The smile she offered was polite, but the glance in her eyes carried something else. "Name?" she asked, already poised over her screen. "Emma Lawson," Emma replied. The receptionist's brows lifted slightly. Her tone cooled. "And your business with Mr. Harrington?" Emma clasped her hands, her posture straight but unpretentious. "He asked to see me." A pause, then a faint laugh, quick and disbelieving. "Of course he did." She typed slowly, as if to stall. "Take a seat." Emma sat in a leather chair far too soft, her back upright, her gaze steady on the floor. She did not fidget. She did not let herself. But she heard whispers from the staff walking past, half-hushed words about the waitress and what happened last night. Minutes stretched. At last, a tall man in a black vest and white shirt approached. He did not bother to hide his disapproval as he looked at her. This way, he led her through corridors lined with photographs of skyscrapers, company launches, charity events filled with smiles of power. The carpet muffled his footsteps, but hers seemed too loud, an intrusion into this silent order. They reached a set of double doors. The man opened them without ceremony. Inside, the office was vast. A wall of glass looked over the city below, its towers shining like mirrors in the morning light. The desk was broad, mahogany polished to a gleam, though little sat upon it but a single pen, a glass of water, and a folded newspaper. Behind the desk, David Harrington rose slowly from his chair. His gray suit was crisp, his posture erect. He regarded Emma with a level gaze that revealed nothing. The door shut behind her. The room seemed suddenly too large, too quiet. Emma stood very still, her hands folded before her apronless dress, waiting. David did not offer a chair. He remained standing, broad shoulders framed by the tall windows. The city sprawled behind him like a conquered empire. His silence pressed down like stone. Emma stayed where she was, her hands resting lightly in front of her. She felt the weight of his gaze, but she did not bow beneath it. Finally, his voice came, low, even, but edged. "You embarrassed me last night." Emma's chin lifted slightly. "I answered your daughter." A flicker, quick as lightning, crossed his eyes, but his expression settled back into granite. "You work in a place where you are paid to serve. You stepped beyond that." Emma's words were soft, but steady. Language is not beyond service. It is part of being human. His jaw tightened. He walked slowly around the desk, each step deliberate. He stopped closer than comfort allowed, studying her as if she were a puzzle piece that did not fit. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," she said simply. "And yet you defied me. I saw a child asking to be heard. That was all." The silence stretched between them, sharp as glass. Outside, far below, a horn blared in the traffic. Inside, the world held its breath. David's voice grew colder. "People like you, waitresses, staff, you stay invisible. That is the order of things." Emma's dark eyes met his without flinching. "Invisible doesn't mean we have nothing to say." The words hung there, fragile and yet unyielding. For the first time, his gaze broke. He turned slightly, walking back toward his desk. He rested his hands against the polished wood, staring at the city as though it could answer for him. His voice softened, though not kindly. "You think you've done something noble, but all you've done is stir pity." Emma shook her head. "No, what you saw wasn't pity. It was recognition." She smiled. "Mr. Harrington, that is more than pity could ever give." His hand flattened against the desk. The muscles in his forearm tensed. For a moment, he seemed about to strike the surface. But instead, he let the breath go. At last, he turned, his eyes sharp again. "Work for me," he said. Not a request, an order dressed as generosity. Emma felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice even. "In what capacity?" "You'll teach her," David replied. "Whatever it is you do." "Signing. Patience. All of it." The offer should have sounded like an honor. Instead, it carried the weight of command, as though he were buying her silence as much as her skill. Emma drew in a quiet breath. She let her hands fall gently to her sides. Emma did not answer at once. The silence lengthened, sharp as wire. The city gleamed behind David, but she looked only at him, her hands folded before her dress. When she spoke, her voice was calm, unhurried. "I don't work for people who treat me like something to be bought." The words landed like stones dropped in still water. David blinked once. Few had ever spoken to him so plainly. Fewer still had refused him outright. He had offered jobs to governors' sons, to partners' heirs, and they had accepted without pause. He had purchased loyalty as easily as he purchased land. This waitress, this young woman, stood unmoved. His lips pressed thin. "Do you know how many people would beg for what I've just offered you?" Emma inclined her head slightly. "Perhaps, but I'm not one of them." The air in the office tightened. The assistant who had ushered her in lingered outside the door, pretending not to listen, yet he stiffened at the sound of her words. David stepped closer, his tone low. "You will regret speaking to me this way." Emma's gaze softened, not hardened. "No, I would regret more if I said yes." Her voice carried no defiance, only certainty. That unsettled him more than if she had shouted. David turned away sharply, striding back behind his desk as though distance could reassert control. He leaned on the mahogany surface, staring down at the untouched pen, the folded paper, the glass of water. His reflection shimmered faintly in the polished wood. Behind him, Emma drew a small card from her pocket. Simple, cream-colored, with her name and a single line in clean script. Interpreter, community volunteer. She laid it on the edge of his desk, sliding it forward without pushing. "If you want help for her," she said, "that is where I can be found. But I don't answer to orders." Her tone was steady, polite. But the act itself, leaving her own card instead of taking his, shifted the balance of the room. David glanced at it, though he did not reach. His silence was heavier than before, but there was something beneath it now, curiosity. Emma inclined her head, as though to say farewell. Then she turned and walked toward the doors. Her steps were unhurried, her back straight. The office doors opened, light from the corridor spilling in. She did not look back. When the doors shut, David remained standing by the desk, his hand hovering over the small card she had left. The office was silent after Emma left. Too silent. David stood motionless, staring at the cream-colored card resting against the polished wood of his desk. Her name, Emma Lawson, stared back at him in plain script. No title of prestige. No company logo. Only a quiet declaration. Interpreter, community volunteer. It was small, modest, almost nothing, yet it unsettled him. He picked it up, turning it between his fingers. He told himself he was only curious about her handwriting or the paper stock, but that was a lie. The truth was simpler. He could not stop hearing her voice. I don't work for people who treat me like something to be bought. He set the card down, harder than he meant to. It made a sharp tap against the wood. He reached for the newspaper folded neatly at the edge of the desk. Tried to read. The words swam. Tried to focus on the markets, on numbers he understood. But between the columns of print, he saw her again, standing there, steady as stone, refusing him. David rose and paced toward the glass wall. The city stretched out below him, sharp lines of towers and streets he had bent to his will over decades. Yet none of it felt as certain as the ground on which she had stood. A knock at the door. His assistant stepped in quietly, tablet in hand. Mr. Harrington, the board is waiting. David waved him off with a curt motion. 5 minutes. The assistant hesitated. Sir, was she important? David's eyes narrowed. She was unusual. The assistant, unsure of what that meant, withdrew quickly. Left alone again, David sat slowly, leaning back in his leather chair. He lifted the card once more, running a thumb across its plain surface. He had dismissed hundreds of people with a word, but he could not dismiss her. He thought of Lily, her hands trembling, her face alight when Emma had answered her. A smile he had not seen since Sarah lived. That image refused to leave him. His authority felt dented, not destroyed but cracked in a way he could not explain. He should have been angry, yet anger was tangled with something else, something like respect. He placed the card in his breast pocket, close to his heart, though he would never admit why. Outside the office, the city roared with life. Inside, the silence stretched, thick, unsettled, impossible to ignore. The building was nothing special. A converted warehouse on the edge of town, bricks worn and patched, windows rattling in their frames. The sign outside was hand-painted, Community Learning Center. The paint was already peeling. Inside, though, the air was alive. Children filled the wide, drafty space. Some wore braces on their legs. Some rolled in wheelchairs that squeaked as they turned. Others sat on the floor with notebooks, pencils clutched in small hands. Their laughter rose, bright and uneven, carrying through the rafters. Emma moved among them, sleeves rolled above her elbows, her navy dress now hidden beneath a simple gray cardigan. She knelt to adjust a boy's chair, tightened the strap on another child's ankle brace, then rose to help a girl shape her hands into letters. Each motion was deliberate, patient. She gave her attention fully, never rushing, never distracted. Her mother, Margaret Lawson, 50, sat in a folding chair against the wall. She wore a faded floral blouse and held a clipboard, marking down notes with careful handwriting. A woman who had spent her life in quiet work, Margaret watched her daughter with steady pride. Her voice was soft, but her presence filled the room like a pillar. Emma, she called gently, don't forget Mrs. Reyes is bringing the lunch supplies later. We'll need the front cleared. Emma nodded, signing the message for one of the children, who scampered off happily to help. There was little money here. The tables were mismatched, the books secondhand. The heating was unreliable, leaving children to wear sweaters indoors. But there was dignity. Each child was seen, each hand held, each voice, spoken or signed, was honored. A girl with sandy hair tugged Emma's sleeve. Show us again, she said, her voice uncertain, her fingers already moving through the alphabet. Emma crouched low. Like this, she said, her hands forming the letters slowly. The children gathered around, copying her movements, their faces earnest. A ripple of joy passed through the circle as one boy managed the full word, hope, without mistake. The group clapped, some with sound, others with hands waving high in silent applause. Emma's smile was small, but it reached her eyes. She lived for moments like this. Outside, a car engine hummed to a stop. Its low purr did not belong to the neighborhood. A figure at the window pointed discreetly. Emma, Margaret murmured, standing. Look! Through the dusty glass, the shine of a black luxury sedan reflected the afternoon sun. The children paused in their play. Whispers began to spread. The door creaked open slowly. The heavy door opened, its hinges groaning. Sunlight spilled across the concrete floor, cutting a bright line into the dim hall. David Harrington stepped inside first. His gray suit was pressed, his tie a darker shade today, his shoes polished enough to reflect the light. The contrast was jarring, steel and glass stepping into brick and dust. Lily followed close behind. Her white dress had been replaced with a pale green one, simple but finely made. She clutched the strap of a small bag, her wide blue eyes darting across the room. She saw the wheelchairs, the braces, the children signing with animated hands. Her lips parted in wonder. The room fell into silence. Conversation stopped. Pencils froze midward. Every child turned to look. Some whispered. Others stared openly. To them, men in tailored suits belonged to banks and boardrooms, not to their fragile world. David's face was unreadable. His gaze swept across the space, taking in the mismatched tables, the scuffed floor, the patched walls. His jaw tightened faintly, though whether in discomfort or judgment, no one could tell. Emma rose from the circle of children. Her gray cardigan was smudged with chalk, her hands faintly ink-stained. She did not hurry to him. She stood in the center of the room, her posture calm, waiting for him to speak. Margaret rose too, setting aside her clipboard. Her expression was steady but firm. She moved closer to her daughter, her presence quiet, supportive. Lily tugged lightly at her father's sleeve, then pointed toward the children. Her hands fluttered in small shapes, hesitant, as though asking if she might join. David hesitated. His hand lingered at his side, half-formed into a motion of restraint. But Emma caught Lily's eyes. She bent slightly, signing one simple phrase. "Would you like to?" Lily's face lit up. She nodded eagerly. The children shifted, opening a small circle for her. Their whispers softened into curiosity. A boy with dark curls patted the spot beside him. Lily glanced once at her father, seeking approval. David's jaw tightened further. Every instinct in him said no. Yet the room had tilted against him. His authority here felt thinner, fragile. Slowly, with visible reluctance, he gave a single nod. Lily stepped forward, her green dress brushing the worn floor, and sat among the children. Her small hands rose, uncertain but brave. David stood alone at the threshold, the outsider now. Emma's gaze lingered on him, calm and unyielding. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, her pale green dress gathered neatly around her knees. The other children leaned close, guiding her small fingers through the alphabet, their excitement soft but insistent. Each letter she formed earned smiles, a gentle cheer, or a flutter of silent applause. Her cheeks flushed pink with effort. David remained near the door. He did not remove his suit jacket, though the room was warm. His eyes followed his daughter, scanning her every movement. But they returned again and again to Emma. She moved with purpose, her cardigan brushing past tables, her hands demonstrating, correcting, encouraging. No wasted gesture. No performance. Just steady discipline. Margaret crossed the room and retrieved a stack of worn binders from a metal cabinet. She set them carefully on a table by the wall. Their edges were frayed, some covered in tape to hold the spines together. She glanced at Emma, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Emma lifted one of the binders, holding it open for the children to see before setting it before David instead. Inside were notes, rows of sketches, diagrams of hand shapes, charts comparing methods of teaching. Margins were filled with precise handwriting, each page layered with years of refinement. "This isn't a pastime," Margaret said quietly, her voice carrying in the silence. "My daughter has built something." David's eyes dropped to the pages. He read a few lines. The handwriting was steady, controlled, but the content was striking. New teaching sequences, patterns of memory recall, ideas for bridging between signing and speech therapy. His brows furrowed. This was more than a waitress's notes. Emma was kneeling beside Lily now, her hand hovering patiently over the girls. "Try again," she said softly, letting Lily repeat the letter. Her eyes never sought David's approval. Her purpose was in front of her. Nearby, a young boy adjusted his hearing aid and whispered, "She has more notebooks, don't she?" Margaret smiled faintly, though it held a weary edge. "Many more." She lowered her voice, almost to herself. "Years of them." David closed the binder slowly. His fingers lingered on the cover, tapping once. "What are you planning?" His tone was low, not hostile but uneasy, As though the question itself carried weight he wasn't ready to face. Emma looked up, her hands still guiding Lily's. Her answer was calm. What I've always been planning. A place where no child is left behind because the world refuses to listen. The room stilled. Even the children seemed to sense the shift in tone. David glanced at the binders again. For the first time, his composure faltered. The room's air was thick with David's silence. His daughter was laughing softly now, her hands clumsy but determined, copying each sign Emma showed her. Around them, the other children leaned in, thrilled to guide her along. Then a slow, deliberate tap echoed through the hall. A wooden cane striking the floor. All heads turned as an older man entered from a side door. His frame was thin, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his movements carried precision. His white shirt was buttoned neatly to the collar, a charcoal vest snug around his chest. A long gray coat hung from his arm, and in his other hand, the polished cane measured each step. "Dr. Samuel Grant," Margaret said quietly, almost reverently. Emma stood at once, her face softening in recognition. "You didn't have to come today." The older man offered her a gentle smile, his lined face creasing. "And miss this? I would not." His voice carried warmth, but also a weight that commanded respect. David straightened unconsciously, as though facing someone of equal stature. Dr. Grant moved closer, peering at the binders on the table. He set a frail but steady hand atop them. "I supervised her work," he said to the room. "Years ago, at the university. What you see here is not the work of an amateur. It is pioneering." Whispers stirred among the volunteers at the edges of the room. A few children craned their necks to see better. David's expression tightened. Pioneering. The words sounded doubtful on his tongue. Dr. Grant turned, his gaze firm despite the softness of age. "Your daughter's struggle is not unusual. What is unusual is finding someone who has mapped paths through that silence with such clarity. Emma was my best student. She should have had her own institute years ago." Emma lowered her eyes, discomfort plain. But Margaret touched her arm gently, as though reminding her to stand in the recognition she had earned. David glanced between them, unsettled. For years he had moved in boardrooms where titles and reputations defined the field of play. Now, in this modest hall, he was facing credentials he could not easily dismiss. Emma turned back to the children, unwilling to let the attention rest on her too long. Her hands moved, drawing Lily into another sign, guiding gently, steady as always. Dr. Grant watched, pride shining quietly in his eyes. "You see? She does not lecture. She does not demand. She draws them forward." The binders remained open on the table, their pages no longer anonymous. David's jaw tightened. His hand lingered on the binder's edge as though he might close it, shut away the proof it contained. Around him, murmurs drifted, the other parents, the volunteers, the children pausing mid-sign to watch. His voice, when it came, was sharp. "This feels convenient." A waitress in a roadside diner. Now, suddenly a prodigy. A professor walking in at just the right moment. "Forgive me, but it reeks of arrangement." The room stiffened. Even the younger children fell quiet, eyes darting between the adults. Emma straightened slowly. She did not flinch, though her cheeks flushed faintly. "Convenient," she repeated, her tone calm. "Do you think I asked your daughter to stumble into my diner? Do you think I begged her to try?" David's shoulders squared, his voice rising. "You could have." Emma's lips pressed together for a moment. Then she spoke again, measured, controlled. "I've spent a decade writing in notebooks no one read. Teaching children no one wanted to teach. Washing dishes to pay rent. If you think I planned this so you could stand in my community hall and accuse me, then you don't understand me at all." Her mother stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "She doesn't plan for applause, Mr. Harland. She plans for children who have none." Dr. Grant lifted his cane and tapped it once against the floor, his eyes fixed on David. "You are grasping at suspicion because the truth unsettles you. That is not her burden to carry." The tension was sharp now. The crowd seemed divided, some nodding in agreement, others uneasy at the challenge directed toward a man of wealth and power. Emma turned her attention back to Lily, crouching so she was eye level. "Show him," she said gently, guiding the girl's hands into another sign. Lily's brow furrowed with concentration. Her small fingers worked the shape of a word she had not managed before. Her lips parted slightly, a soft breath escaping as though pushing herself across a threshold. Emma nodded. "Yes." Again. David watched, his protest caught in his throat. The girl repeated the sign, clearer now. Then she looked at her father with a sudden brightness in her eyes, her hands forming the shape deliberately, presenting it to him. For a moment, the hall was utterly still. Emma did not look at David. She kept her gaze on Lily, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder, steadying her as she signed again. The silence stretched until the weight of it forced the father to meet his daughter's eyes. The hall held its breath. Lily's small hands trembled slightly, but the shape she made was unmistakable, clear, intentional. Her lips moved with the faintest whisper, a shadow of the word she signed. David froze. His eyes widened, then narrowed, as though he doubted what he had just witnessed. But Lily repeated it, slower this time, her gaze locked onto her father's face. She was asking him something, offering him a bridge across the silence that had long separated them. A soft gasp rippled through the room. One of the children whispered, she said it, and another hushed them, but the awe lingered. Emma kept her hand on Lily's shoulder, steady and calm. That's it, she murmured, not performing for the crowd, but for the child in front of her. That's the word. You've done it. Tears welled in Lily's eyes. She tried again, more confident now, her small fingers curling into the shape with determination. Her face lit with pride. David's breath caught audibly. His hand reached toward his daughter, then stopped short, fingers curling helplessly. For years he had drowned himself in business, in control, in silence louder than words. And now his daughter stood before him, her little hands cutting through all of it with a language he had refused to face. Dr. Grant leaned on his cane, eyes glistening, whispering more to himself than anyone else. Proof. Not in books. In her. The other parents looked on, some weeping quietly, others holding their children a little tighter. Even the volunteers, hardened by years of overlooked effort, softened into stillness. Lily stepped closer to her father, her hands rising again. She shaped the sign once more, deliberate, certain. Her lips parted, forming the sound alongside it. This time, David understood. The room seemed to fold inward. No sound remained but the faint rush of David's uneven breath. He dropped to one knee, his expensive suit pulling at the seams, his hands trembling as he reached for hers. For the first time, he copied the movement clumsily, his large fingers awkward beside her small ones. He failed the first time, his thumb misplaced, but Lily laughed, a bright, clear laugh that broke the tension. She corrected him, guiding his hand. And he tried again. The crowd did not cheer. They did not clap. They simply watched, awed into reverent silence, as a father and daughter spoke, without words for the first time. Emma stepped back quietly, allowing the moment its space. Her presence lingered like a steady flame, but the light belonged to Lily now. David remained on one knee. His daughter's small hands rested in his, guiding him through the shape of the sign once more. His jaw trembled as he tried, faltering, correcting, then finally mirroring it with some success. The room still held silence. Every eye was on him, not her, on the man who had built towers, bought companies, broken rivals. Now he sat in a worn community hall with paint peeling at the edges, being taught by a child no one expected to be heard. His shoulders rose and fell with a long breath. He looked down at Lily, who was smiling with pride, then up at Emma, who stood quietly to the side. For the briefest instant, the hardness in his eyes flickered. But then doubt, fear, pride. They returned. He stood slowly, straightening his jacket as though armoring himself again. His voice was low, strained. "It doesn't change anything," he muttered. A whisper rippled through the hall. Some of the parents exchanged disappointed glances. Others looked away, unwilling to challenge a man with such power. Emma's mother, Evelyn, took a step forward. Her voice was steady but quiet, the kind of tone that could slice through walls. "It changes everything. You just don't want to admit it." David's jaw set. He turned slightly, facing the crowd instead of his daughter. His instincts screamed for control, for distance, for protection of the image he carried. But the weight of Lily's gaze pulled at him like an anchor. "Mr. Harland," Dr. Grant said, leaning heavily on his cane. "You are at a fork. Deny what you've seen, and the silence will win. Embrace it, and you may lose your armor, but you will gain your daughter." David swallowed. His lips pressed into a thin line. His hand twitched at his side, as though resisting the urge to reach for Lily again. The hall waited. No one moved. Even the younger children, restless only minutes before, sat frozen with wide eyes. Finally, David closed his eyes for a moment. His shoulders sagged as though a weight pressed down on him from every direction. When he opened them again, he looked not at the crowd, not at Emma, but only at Lily. She signed the word once more, patient and clear. Her lips whispered it. David's throat tightened. He signed it back, slower this time, more deliberate. The hall exhaled. Emma's eyes softened. Evelyn placed a hand over her chest. Dr. Grant nodded once, solemnly. The fork had been chosen. The word lingered in the air, not spoken but signed. Father and daughter, bound in silence yet finally reaching one another. But silence cannot last forever. The murmurs began. Cameras clicked, small, discreet at first, then louder as local reporters who had followed David Harland here realized what they were witnessing. A billionaire on his knees in a church hall, fumbling through sign language with his child. David rose to his full height, brushing his suit jacket into order. His face, however, remained raw. The mask of power sat crooked. His eyes searched the crowd. He saw judgment, pity, admiration, emotions he usually crushed before they formed. Tonight, they pressed in. A reporter's voice cut through. "Mr. Harland, what does this mean for your daughter? For you?" David stiffened. Normally, he would swat such questions away with polished indifference. But Lily tugged at his sleeve. She looked up at him, her lips moving in a soft, soundless word, her hands shaping it again. It broke something in him. He cleared his throat, the microphone of a phone already capturing his every word. "For years," he began, voice low but steady, "I pretended silence was easier, that if I ignored it, it would not hurt. But in doing so, I made my daughter invisible. And that is a sin I can no longer carry." The room stilled again. Even the reporters lowered their hands slightly, surprised by the candor. David's eyes flicked toward Emma, then to Evelyn, then finally back to the children clustered together. "This place, what you've built, it shames me. You do so much with so little, while I have given nothing." His hand trembled as he adjusted his cufflink. "That ends tonight." Gasps scattered. Some parents leaned forward, unable to believe what they heard. Others glanced at Emma, as if seeking confirmation that this moment was real. David pressed on, his voice breaking only once. "I will not hide my daughter's world anymore. I will not bury her voice. I commit, here, before you all, to support this mission, to give it resources, buildings, teachers, whatever it needs. Not as charity, as a debt paid." Cameras flashed. The quiet room now hummed with whispered astonishment. Emma stood motionless, but her eyes carried both caution and hope. Evelyn, beside her, pressed her hand firmly against her daughter's arm, grounding her. Dr. Grant wiped at his eye discreetly, though his lips curved into a faint smile. David turned once more to Lily. His voice softened to nearly a whisper. "No more silence between us." The crowd did not clap. They bowed inward, reverent. A decision had been carved into the air, undeniable, permanent. Months later, the church hall was no longer the center of everything. It still stood, still hosted gatherings, still carried the smell of old wood and faint incense. But something larger had grown from that night. On the edge of town, where an abandoned warehouse once sagged against the wind, stood the new building. Pale stone walls, wide glass windows that caught the sun, and doors that opened without a push. Above them, letters carved clean and clear, the Harlan Center for Communication and Learning. Inside, children filled the rooms. Some in wheelchairs, some moving carefully with braces, some chattering in bright bursts of laughter. And others silent but animated, their hands alive with signing, their eyes shining with connection. The sound was not noise, but energy, flowing between them, carrying dignity. Emma walked through the hall in a simple gray blouse and long skirt, a notebook in one hand, her hair tied back. She stopped to adjust a boy's hand as he signed, patient, steady, before moving on. Her mother Evelyn worked nearby, helping set out picture boards for a smaller group. She wore her usual dark blue dress and thin cardigan, sleeves rolled carefully so her hands could move freely. Her eyes carried pride whenever she looked at Emma, but also watchfulness, protecting, steadying, as she always had. In the corner, Dr. Grant leaned against his cane, speaking softly with two young teachers, guiding them in methods he had once used in his research. And there, near the doorway, stood David Harland. no longer in a flawless black suit, but in a simple dark jacket and open-collar shirt. He looked smaller somehow, though not in stature. His phone stayed in his pocket. His watch was gone. His eyes followed only one thing, Lily. She was in the middle of a group, her blonde hair tied in a neat ponytail, her face glowing with laughter. She signed quickly with another girl, then slowed to guide a younger child, shaping each movement with patience. For the first time in years, she led, not hidden, not hushed. David's lips parted, as though he wanted to say something aloud. Instead, he let his hands twitch slightly, practicing the shape of the signs he had been learning. His movements were clumsy, but persistent. The staff noticed. Parents noticed. Yet no one mocked. For a man known for steel and stone, the sight of him fumbling with his own hands carried more weight than any speech he could give. Emma paused as she passed him. Their eyes met. He gave a slight nod, one of acknowledgement. Not superiority, not debt, but respect. She returned it. The building hummed with life. A seed planted in silence had become motion, growth, and promise. The late afternoon sun poured through the wide windows of the Harlan Center, striking the floor with soft gold. The day's classes were finished. Children drifted home, their laughter echoing faintly down the hall. Only a few remained: Emma, Evelyn, Dr. Grant, and David. And Lily, who lingered, reluctant to leave the space she had claimed as her own. She tugged gently at her father's sleeve. Her hands moved with practiced ease, small but confident. "Come outside." David followed her to the courtyard. It was simple, a stretch of grass, a bench, and a young tree planted weeks ago. Its leaves stirred in the quiet breeze. Emma and Evelyn stayed a few paces back. Dr. Grant settled onto the bench, cane resting across his knees, watching with an elder's patience. Lily turned to her father. She signed a phrase slowly, carefully, repeating it until his hands caught the shape. It was not complicated. Just 4 words. "I am not broken." David's throat worked as he tried to speak them aloud, but the sound caught. His hands trembled as he shaped the words back, each movement more like prayer than speech. Lily smiled. Then, without warning, she reached up and took his large hand in both of hers. She placed it gently against her chest, over her small heartbeat. He froze. His fingers curled slightly, feeling the steady rhythm beneath them. For years, he had measured worth by numbers on screens, contracts signed, towers raised. But here, just here, was something beyond all his ledgers. His eyes burned. For the first time, he did not hide it. Emma stepped closer. She did not speak. She did not need to. Evelyn's voice broke the silence, low but strong. "The world teaches us to build walls. Sometimes, dignity is letting them fall." David lowered himself slowly, knees bending until he sat in the grass across from his daughter. He lifted both hands and signed the phrase again, carefully, fully. "I am not broken." Lily leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his chest. His arms encircled her. The courtyard stilled around them. Behind, Emma's eyes softened with quiet triumph. She had not fought for recognition, not demanded it, not raised her voice. She had simply carried the truth until others could no longer deny it. Dr. Grant looked to her and nodded once, the weight of history in his eyes. Evelyn's hand found Emma's, squeezing it gently. The breeze moved the young tree, its branches swaying as though bowing to the moment. A father bent, a daughter rose, and a lesson was etched into silence that would never again be empty. The camera lingered, then faded. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.